South Africa's history of activism is rooted in the struggle against apartheid. Now, the born-free generation believe it is their time to fight for a more equal and just society. Welcome to Generation Change, a global series that attempts to challenge and understand the ideas that mobilize youth around the world. I'm Ayanda Chali, an independent journalist based here in Johannesburg. In this episode, we meet two women who are working towards radical change to address challenges as varied as gender-based violence, class and racial inequality, and climate change. Kitimeto, you were born after 94, at the end of apartheid. What do you think people don't know about the role of women in the struggle against apartheid?
I really think the way in which history is told, it serves a purpose, right? Which is also to reinforce, a male-dominated presence and power structure, right? There's this reinforcement of these martyrs, right? These men who come and save this vulnerable group of women, which is inherently wrong and false. Women were organizing in churches, stokvels, trade unions. Women were literally carrying the country on their backs and shoulders. However, history continues to omit that. And I think what that does is that it continues to further alienate women and their contributions they make in society, whether political, social, even economic.
We're here at Constitution Hill in Johannesburg, and particularly in this structure, we are at the women's jail. Why was this a significant space for you?
When I think about the caliber of women that were incarcerated in this place, it literally just brings me in awe. It's the persistence of women writing themselves into history, even in their absence, right? And for me as a young feminist, as a young activist, that has been really pinnacle in grounding my own activism. As a new generation, as the woke generation, we must never ever get tired of developing new resistance strategies. I mean, if these women were able to organize themselves under probably one of the most difficult conditions, I see no reason why we're unable to achieve, the idea of building the biggest feminist global movement.
You're now 26, you've been an activist since you were 17. What was the sort of compelling factor that made you think, I want to be an activist?
There was a case, a girl by the name of Anine Boysens in Western Cape. She was raped and brutally killed. And to me, I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm 17, she's 17. She got killed on a night out. And I was thinking about all the times I like to jump, to go out with my friends, right?
It could happen to you.
It could happen to me. There was just so much uniqueness and similarity. Almost a decade later, and now I'm the chair and founder of the Black Women Caucus. We are not interested in the very nice pre-recorded speeches. We are interested in real, tangible solutions. What ultimately Black Women Caucus seeks to do is to really create a society free of violence. We don't want to live this violence-ridden society all the time. We want to be comfortable. I mean, I'm 26. I want to be able to walk down the streets of Johannesburg and not worry about, am I next?
So you're 17, yes, and you've already been an activist for a few years now. How did you start, and what was it that made you start?
So it all started in 2018 when we were tasked to do some research on climate change. I grew a lot of climate anxiety, seeing all these facts about how we have limited time and watching my future fade away as the health of our environment declines. And what ignited my activism was this anxiety to do everything in my power to create a change.
Well, I mean, some people will say that, you know what, this stuff is for people who can afford to have 5 different bins and recycle. But, you've spoken to the fact that it does affect people who, live in the townships, poor people.
The first time I came to realize the seriousness behind environmental racism was when I spoke to a friend of mine who said when she was very young, she had to live with her grandmother who stayed in Soweto. And she stayed there, she developed breathing difficulties. And a few years later, when she moved back to the suburbs, everything was fine. And that's when she made the link that the air quality in Soweto was so terrible that she developed asthma from that. And you can make that link with apartheid, how the apartheid government basically dumped the black people in one area and Indian people in another area and colored people in one area, and gave white people that land that belonged to those citizens that they just dumped in other areas. And even though we live in a post-apartheid South Africa, that neglect is still carried out.
What has been rewarding and that you would consider, big or small, an achievement that you've been able to kind of get to with your work so far?
I think small achievements that make a big impact in my life is when someone will come to me personally and say, thank you for teaching me this, I've learned and now I know better and now I can do better. I think the biggest achievements are also just speaking up at protests. A lot of activists around the world don't have that privilege and freedom of speech to speak their mind. So being able to stand up in front of crowds and speak your mind is firstly a privilege and also a big achievement when you once again hear people listening, you hear the press responding, you see it come out in articles.
Sarah, you're 17 and Kitumeza, you're 26. I'm wondering for both of you what you feel the defining values and elements of each of your respective generations' activisms are.
Okay. So firstly, I belong to the first cohort of the Born Frees, the generation that was just born after democracy in South Africa. And I think for a large, to a large extent, our activism is really centered and grounded around holding, our democratic government accountable, right? Hoping for a significant change in the living conditions of youth and just the population more broadly. So we do borrow a lot from the anti-apartheid struggle in terms of the music, the songs, the kind of the struggle songs that we sing, and also some of the organizing and mobilizing strategies. We're really still focused in terms of mass-based movement building, and this is quite evident with the Fees Must Fall student protests, across 26 institutions of higher learning, which saw university students demanding for free decolonized higher education. But of course, the success of, moments such as Fees Must Fall are largely attributed to digital and online activism and how that has also helped us in terms of shaping our own narratives.
Sarah, you know something about that. What would you like to add?
Gen Z, we grew up in the age of technology, the world of social media, and that came with a lot of benefits in terms of with mobilizing people internationally and especially now during a pandemic. What social media has also brought is lots of inclusivity, because you're moving away from just that mainstream media narrative and you're embracing a diverse range of narratives and you getting to include so much more within your activism. So I think the inclusivity that social media has brought has been a key and defining factor with Gen Z.
South Africa's most recent youth-led mass movement was Fees Must Fall, which, as you mentioned earlier, was the fight to gain wider access for free and decolonized tertiary education. What do you think it was about that movement, Kitumeza, that made it resonate so widely with our generation?
I think a big part of Fees Must Fall, beyond issues of access, was really holding our government accountable to say, to what extent are you prepared to sacrifice an upcoming generation of young leaders and activists purely on the basis of, keeping or being deliberate about keeping a commodified, a capitalist, a racist system that continues to marginalize and exclude Black students specifically from institutions of higher learning.
Sarah, you were about 12 or 13 when this was unfolding. on, the news media. What did it mean for you on a personal level to see young people really, rise up on such a mass scale?
It was really inspiring. It was watching history unfold right before my eyes. And while I didn't understand how complex the issue was back then, I understood the surface level of it. But diving into activism, the Fees Must Fall activists are one of the most inspiring activists that I look up to. I mean, the fact that some of them are still in jail to this day fighting for a cause they believe in just shows how empowered they were and how inspired, angry, and passionate they were.
Did it give you permission to be angry as well?
Yes, 100%. And like I said before, that anger just ignites a passion to stand up and fight.
Kitimete, as your t-shirt says, you are the founder, in fact, of the Black Women's Caucus, which among the many mandates you have is looking into eradicating gender-based violence. Can you talk to me about the myriad of violences that South African women right now are facing?
I mean, when we speak about gender-based violence, of course, the most immediate understanding is around sexual and physical forms of violence, and this makes sense. I mean, South Africa is seen as a rape capital globally. Not a pretty tag to have on, by the way. Our femicide rate is 5 times higher than the global average, right? And so our understanding around gender-based violence and femicide has really been within, that conceptual framework. However, as Black Women Caucus, we're saying that it is a disservice for us to reduce gender-based violence and femicide to only physical and sexual forms of violence, political violence, economic violence, environmental violence, social violence are all violences that contribute to the vulnerabilities of women. And it's important that when we find solutions and we propose solutions, that they must be multi-pronged and they must be cross-sectoral, so that they're able to address the sources of the violence.
So can you give me an example of what that work looks like, or how you bring these solutions to the public?
Of course. A lot of the stats and research done in South Africa around gender-based violence has attributed to a women's economic participation as a massive driver of vulnerability to gender-based violence and femicide. So in 2019, on the 13th of September, when we marched to the Richest Square Mile in Africa, in Sandton, demanding greater participation from private sector in terms of, their response to gender-based violence, we're ultimately saying you need to also be held accountable for women's economic vulnerability, because largely when we think about rape and femicide, we always think about it within the confinements of the home, right? But the moment we made it a business issue, an economic issue, we're ultimately saying that the continuous subjugation and violation of women, number one, costs the South African economy between 20 and 40 billion rand annually, right? And that also means that part of our mobilization and advocacy requires us to make structural changes.
Sarah, it looks like you had something to add there.
Yeah, 100%. It needs systemic change. If you're just bringing change on one surface, that surface is widespread. And in order for structural change to take place and the most effective change to take place, it needs to be systemic. It needs to be institutionalized. So
we're addressing every level of the problem.
Yes, 100%.
Sarah, you started Climate Warriors and you're a part of the Collective Movement. Tell me what Collective Movement is and what work you do with them.
So the Collective Movement is a youth-led intersectional climate group, and we aim to achieve climate justice through social justice and vice versa. So it's a group of young activists, and recently our work has all been on social media and online because of the pandemic. So this year we're working on climate change through a Pan-African context. So interviewing or having discussions with activists from Uganda and Kenya, and just broadening our perspective on climate change and how policy making takes place in different areas around the world and different challenges, and coming up with solutions. And then also spreading awareness and advocating and pushing forward the Climate Justice Charter movement to educate as many people on the climate change issue and exposing the intersectionality needed and bringing about inclusivity within the climate justice movement.
Why do you think, specifically in the South African context, that climate justice has taken a backseat to other issues, such as, the ones that Kitumetse and I were talking about now?
So I think in the past, obviously, if you're looking at a pre-democratic South Africa, where people are fighting against the apartheid regime and fighting for liberation, climate change, understandably so, is going to take a backseat when you're fighting to be free in your own country. But if you're looking at a post-apartheid South Africa, where we're living in a democracy, I think there's a huge sense of apathy from those in power. That, firstly, the people in power putting profit before their people, we're stuck in this capitalist mindset. Another issue is the climate literacy rates in South Africa are extremely low, and that comes down to an educational issue. So apathy and the lack of climate literacy.
Cool. Kitumetse, what do you think are the intersections between climate justice and the other kinds of justice that, your work strives for?
Really interesting, hey? I really like the fact that, bridging climate justice with social justice. And I think for a long time, we've thought about climate justice as a standalone kind of, struggle. It's like sitting there in the corner and nobody really wants to deal with it. But what has been very important and has been quite a big eye-opener for me, myself as a feminist, is the work we've been doing in informal settlements, and how when you spoke about literacy, environmental literacy, how, we're still struggling to make the connections at community level between the environment and social justice. For an example, one of the communities that we work in is called Kathrada Park Informal Settlement. Poor water and sanitation, breakdown in infrastructure, and just listening to you, I can already see, how climate justice fits into that, right? But I do believe that to a large extent, the climate justice movement has positioned itself as quite a white elitist movement, right? It has struggled to deal with the very concrete conditions that an ordinary person in South Africa is facing. But I think in a country like South Africa, we need to be able to root and ground our ideology and our advocacy in the lived experiences of people on a day-to-day basis.
Sarah, what do you say to that?
Climate change for the longest time has seemed like a very privileged issue. If I'm struggling to put food on my plate, why should I care about the air quality? Why should I care about litter on the beach? And I think that comes down to the need for climate conscious media. And with climate conscious media, inclusivity. So looking at climate change across the world. And also understanding that solutions that may work in the West aren't going to work in Africa. For various reasons, we have different economies, different policies, different governments, different histories. It just won't fit. And I think what's very vital when looking at climate justice and climate change is looking at it through an intersectional lens. So instead of separating the environmental factors and the social factors, bridging them together, because climate justice and social justice intrinsically linked together to bring about positive change. By tackling one, that solution is going to affect the other in either a positive or negative way, depending on what the solution is. So if you're looking at climate change, geographically, climate change is going to disproportionately affect poorer Black communities. So within your activism, within climate activism, you need to take into account classism, racism, sexism, homophobia. For example, if a natural disaster were to strike, those communities would be most vulnerable. And if you look at the way society treats those communities now, imagine how much worse it's going to be when aid due to natural disaster is needed and needs to be brought to those communities. So advocating for human rights, you can't pick and choose. No form of oppression exists in isolation.
I wonder what you both think, the possibility of achieving your ideas of what a just world looks like. What do you think the implications of capitalism has on the work that you do? Kitumetse?
What I'm picking up is that capitalism inherently, glorifies the individual. Its limitations, however, in activism is that activism is not a one-man show. right? And unfortunately, capitalism has created and it continues to co-opt civic action and civic interventions and presents them as one-man shows, right? Where we have this martyr that comes out, this internet sensation that comes out and is going to save the world, And I think what that does is that it breaks down organic movement building strategies, right? I don't think we have any strong, tangible movements that are being, nurtured. But instead, what we're seeing individual activists rising. And listen, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have the pop stars of a movement emerge. They're important. They keep the movement fun and dynamic. But I do think it's important that we root our activism in communities, because these alternative realities that we want, this anti-capitalist reality that we want, this feminist intersectional reality that we want, is not going to be fostered by an individual. It needs an active, active efforts from a collective in order to drive that mandate. And I think this is some of the critiques of capitalism infiltrating civic and activist work.
Yeah, 100%. Community-based change is the most sustainable and effective change in the long run. If you're looking at capitalism, in a capitalistic world, the most ideal position you can be in right now is to be a white man. And that breaks down so much. It breaks down the feminist movement, it breaks down any movement led by women. Capitalism breeds a system of inequality.
Of course.
It's always going to be, if I'm winning, someone else is losing. And like you said, it's a very individual, it glorifies individual work. And that is extremely problematic. It's also very problematic to have one face represent a whole movement, because it excludes people that don't match that face, that don't match that demographic. So yeah, definitely not. Carbon capitalism is the main cause to our climate crisis.
Sorry, can I just add on to that? I'm reflecting. Reflecting is such an important aspect of growing, and as activists, we should never stop reflecting. And when I think about, the anti-apartheid movement, firstly, I know for a fact that many people who participated in those movements, in those forms of resistance, were not participating because they were individuals that they were idolizing. It's because they felt a strong sense of personhood. The issue is affecting me directly. Therefore, I need to actively participate in finding the solutions. And I think, the idea of the glorifying of the individual robs us of that. Yeah. And I think our communities are there to hold us grounded, to hold us accountable, and to make sure that we are working and living within the ideals of the movements that we represent.
Well, I guess in closing, I'm curious if it's not clear so far, what you both hope to achieve, and if you feel optimistic about, being able to actually achieve those things. Kitumetse?
I'm a perpetual optimist, firstly, as a disclaimer. So I definitely do think things will get better. I do think that, we need to intensify our demands and struggles, but also change our sites of oppression and fighting, right? I think so many times, what activism and how we traditionally know activism to be is that we take to the streets, right, to get our messages across. And although that is important, we also need to see some radical advancement and transformation in the policy and governance spheres, right? And so as Black Women Caucus, at the heart of the solutions that we propose as a social movement is the realization and strengthening of feminist movements which are going to foster feminist leadership. We need to see an emergence of new radical feminist leaders really shaping the world to where we want to take it, right? And I honestly believe that we've got the right energies, we've got the minds, we've got the hearts, and let's do it.
Sarah?
Like I said earlier, I have climate anxiety, and the only thing I can cling onto with that climate anxiety is optimism towards the future. It drives me to constantly wake up and make the decision that this is what I'd like to change, and this is where, that quote, be the change you want to see and advocate for the change that you'd like to see. So I think a main goal is to just get the same urgency that we are carrying today, with sending that to the hearts of our government and our leadership to demand a climate emergency and to attack all of these social issues that we've unpacked today. Because once again, social justice is climate justice and vice versa. So yeah, I think unification needs to take place, like today, between the generations, and just, you know, keep the energy, don't let it die. I feel growing up with social media, you see activism turns into a trend and it breeds a lot of performative activism, and every year and every month there's a new hashtag and something new is trending, and instead of treating activism and social issues as a trend, make it keeping that advocacy a long, constant action that lives within your heart.
Sarah Kitimedze, thank you so much for joining me on Generation Change.
Thank you.